My parents skipped my wedding to attend my sister's housewarming party after I refused to invite her for punching me. Now, my grandparents will be walking me down the aisle. Growing up, it didn't take long to understand where I stood in our family hierarchy. Clara was the sun, and I was a distant planet orbiting on the fringes. My parents adore her, their pride shining every time she entered a room. Whether it was her grades, her beauty, or her charm, they treated everything Clara did as if it were nothing short of miraculous. I wasn't jealous, at least not at first. I simply wanted a fraction of the attention they gave her. Family trips were a glaring example. Clara always got first pick, the best seat in the car, the room with the best view, the lion's share of souvenirs. If there wasn't enough space or budget for everyone, I was the one left behind, sent to stay with my grandparents. They would always frame it like a kindness. "You love staying with Grandma and Grandpa, don't you?" my mom would say. And while I did love my grandparents, it didn't soften the sting of being excluded. But what should have felt like rejection became my refuge. My grandparents treated me with a love that wasn't transactional or conditional. With them, I wasn't the other daughter. I was simply me, and that was enough. They encouraged my curiosity, celebrated my achievements, and listened to my worries without judgment. It was in their house that I learned what unconditional love truly felt like. Clara, however, seemed to view my mere existence as a threat. She turned everything into a contest. Who could get the highest grades, who could make mom and dad laugh the hardest, who could dominate every conversation at the dinner table. But no matter how hard I tried to keep up, she always found a way to edge me out. "You'll never be as good as me," she once said after I proudly announced that I'd made the honor roll. "Mom and dad know it too. That's why they don't waste their time on you." Her words stung, but I pretended they didn't bother me. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how deeply she could wound me. As we got older, her jealousy turned into something darker. Her competitiveness wasn't limited to grades or attention. If I made a friend, Clara swooped in and claimed them as her own. If I showed interest in a hobby, she would pick it up just to outshine me. It wasn't enough for her to win. She needed me to lose. The breaking point came when I was 15. I had been talking to a boy from school, Brian, who I'd had a crush on for months. Clara caught wind of it and, in typical fashion, decided to insert herself into the situation. She started flirting with him, calling it harmless fun, but I could see the glee in her eyes every time she saw how much it bothered me. One evening, she confronted me out of nowhere. "You really think Brian likes you?" she scoffed. "He's just being nice. He's not into you, he's into me. Why do you always have to ruin everything?" I snapped, my frustration bubbling over. Her eyes narrowed, and before I could react, she shoved me against the wall. "You don't deserve anything," she hissed. It escalated so fast, I barely had time to process what was happening. She swung her fist and punched me square in the jaw. The impact sent me stumbling backward, my head hitting the corner of my desk. I lay there, stunned, clutching my throbbing jaw as Clara stood over me, breathing heavily. "Don't you dare tell Mom and Dad," she said, her voice cold. "They'll just say it's your fault anyway." For once, she was wrong. When my grandparents saw the bruise on my face, they refused to let it slide. They called my parents, demanding accountability, but all they got were excuses. "Clara wouldn't do that," my mom said dismissively. "You know how dramatic Lily can be." My grandparents didn't back down. They filed a report with CPS, forcing my parents to take the situation seriously, at least on the surface. But instead of punishing Clara, they doubled down on their favoritism, blaming me for causing drama. I couldn't take it anymore. That night, I packed a bag and moved in with my grandparents. As I closed the door on my childhood home, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't spend the rest of my life begging for love from people who only had room in their hearts for Clara. In my grandparents' house, I finally felt safe. But the scars from my family's rejection would take years to heal, and I had no idea just how deeply they'd cut. It started like any other evening. My parents were in the living room flipping through TV channels, and I was in my room trying to focus on homework. Clara, as usual, was perched in the center of everything, basking in the attention. She'd been in a foul mood all day, and I should have known better than to be anywhere in her line of fire. The spark that lit the fuse was a boy named Brian. He wasn't even someone I'd spent much time with, just a classmate who occasionally shared notes with me in history class. But Clara had decided he was hers, and in her mind, that meant I had to be kept away from him at all costs. "You've been flirting with Brian," she accused out of nowhere, storming into the kitchen where I was grabbing a snack. Her voice was loud enough to catch my parents' attention. "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "I barely even know him." "Don't play dumb," she spat. "You've been throwing yourself at him, trying to get him to notice you." The absurdity of her words made me laugh, which only made her angrier. "I don't want Brian," I said, shaking my head. "If you're so into him, go for it." "I don't care." Apparently, that wasn't the answer she wanted. By the time I went back to my room, Clara was seething. I heard her stomping down the hallway, her voice rising as she accused me of always trying to ruin her life. I shut my door, hoping she'd cool off, but a few seconds later, she burst in without knocking. "You think you're so perfect, don't you?" she shouted. "Always playing the victim. Always trying to take what's mine." I turned to face her, keeping my voice calm. "Clara, leave me alone." "Or what?" she sneered, stepping closer. "Or I'll tell Mom and Dad that you're acting crazy," I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. That's when it happened. She punched me hard. Her fist connected with my jaw, sending a sharp jolt of pain shooting through my face. I stumbled backward, hitting the edge of my desk as I fell. The room spun as I sat on the floor, cradling my jaw and blinking back tears. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I gasped, my voice shaky. Clara didn't even look remorseful. She stood over me, her chest heaving with anger. "Don't you dare tell anyone," she said coldly. "They'll just take my side anyway." She wasn't entirely wrong. When I managed to pull myself together and go to my parents, their reaction was devastating. "You must have done something to set her off," my mom said, frowning at me as Clara sobbed dramatically on the couch. "She's been under a lot of stress," my dad added. "You know how sensitive she is. Couldn't you have just let it go?" It wasn't until my grandparents arrived later that evening and saw the swelling on my face that anyone took me seriously. My grandmother's expression hardened as she gently examined my jaw, while my grandfather glared at my parents. "This is unacceptable," Grandma said firmly. "If you're not going to protect her, we will." They called CPS the next day, prompting an investigation that sent shockwaves through my family. While nothing substantial came of the report, Clara managed to paint the incident as a one-time mistake. It was enough to make me realize that I couldn't stay in that house anymore. That night, I packed a suitcase and moved in with my grandparents. For the first time in years, I felt safe. But as I settled into my new life with them, a part of me couldn't stop replaying the events of that night. Clara's punch hadn't just been physical. It had been a culmination of years of resentment, jealousy, and favoritism. And even though I was finally out of her reach, the scars she left behind were just beginning to show. Moving in with my grandparents was like stepping into a completely different world, one where I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells or competing for scraps of attention. From the moment I unpacked my things, they made it clear that their home was my home, no conditions, no expectations. "Sweetheart," my grandmother said one night as she set a plate of cookies in front of me, "you don't have to prove anything here. You're loved, just as you are." For the first time in years, I believed it. They listened to me when I talked about my day, celebrated every small accomplishment, and encouraged me to chase my dreams without comparing me to Clara. My grandfather even helped me start a vegetable garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the chance. "This is your space," he said as we planted the first seeds. "Let it grow, just like you will." Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents and Clara deteriorated completely. My parents, instead of reflecting on what had gone wrong, doubled down on their favoritism. They called me dramatic and accused me of breaking up the family by leaving. "You've always been so sensitive," my mom said during one particularly heated phone call. "Clara didn't mean it, and you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Maybe if you'd tried harder to get along, none of this would have happened," my dad added. As for Clara, she took the victim role to new heights. She told anyone who would listen that I'd exaggerated everything, painting herself as the misunderstood older sister. I overheard through mutual acquaintances that she'd started referring to me as ungrateful and spoiled, claiming I'd abandoned the family for no reason. At first, their words stung. I hated being painted as the villain in a story where I'd only ever wanted to be loved and treated fairly. But over time, the hurt began to fade as I realized I didn't need their validation. I was thriving without them, and that was all the proof I needed. With my grandparents' encouragement, I threw myself into school and discovered a sense of purpose I hadn't known was possible. I joined clubs, took on leadership roles, and surrounded myself with friends who valued me for who I was. For the first time, I felt seen and appreciated. It was during this time that I met Liam, the man who would later become my fiancé. We were both volunteering at a community event when he struck up a conversation with me, his easy smile and warm demeanor immediately putting me at ease. Liam was everything I hadn't realized I needed, kind, patient, and unwavering in his support. As our relationship grew, I met his family and they welcomed me with open arms. They included me in family dinners, sent me thoughtful messages on my birthday, and never made me feel like I had to earn their love. Family isn't about blood, Liam's mom told me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. It's about who shows up for you. And you'll always have us. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of a family where I truly belonged. My grandparents, my friends, and now Liam's family had filled the void my parents and Clara had left behind. As I stood at the edge of this new chapter in my life, I realized something important. I didn't need my parents or Clara to feel whole. The love I'd found was more than enough. And for the first time, I felt strong enough to let the past go, or so I thought. When Liam proposed, it felt like the culmination of every moment of love and support I'd found in my new life. His proposal was simple yet heartfelt, and as he slid the ring onto my finger, I couldn't help but think of how far I'd come since leaving my parents' house. This was my fresh start, my chance to build a family defined by love, not favoritism or competition. I didn't expect my parents to care. We hadn't spoken in years, and the last I'd heard from them was a strained voicemail about respecting their privacy after I moved out. So when I received a card in the mail, my first instinct was confusion. It was a plain congratulatory card, the kind you might buy on impulse at a grocery store, but the note inside made my heart stop. "Congratulations on your engagement," my dad had written in his careful, deliberate handwriting. "I hope we can move past the drama of the past and start fresh. I'd love to walk you down the aisle if you'll have me." I stared at the card for a long time, torn between skepticism and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally changed. When I showed the card to Liam, he didn't say much at first, just studied my face. "How do you feel about it?" he asked eventually. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe they've changed, that they actually care. And the other part thinks it's just another way for them to sweep everything under the rug." In the end, against my better judgment, I agreed to let them attend. My dad walking me down the aisle had always been a dream I'd held onto, even when our relationship was strained. Maybe this was their way of trying to make amends, I told myself. Maybe this was the start of something new. But as soon as I called to share the news, the cracks in their fresh start began to show. "I'm glad we'll be there," my mom said during our first phone call in years. Her voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful, as if she were rehearsing for a part. "But have you sent Clara her invitation yet?" The question caught me off guard. "I wasn't planning to invite Clara," I said slowly. There was a pause, and then a sharp intake of breath. "What do you mean you're not inviting her?" "Mom, we haven't spoken in years. You know what happened between us. I don't want her at my wedding." "She's your sister," my mom said, her tone suddenly tinged with exasperation. "It's time to bury the hatchet. This day is about family, and she deserves to be there." "I don't think she does," I replied, my voice firm. The conversation spiraled from there. My mom accused me of being petty and immature, while I tried to explain that my wedding was supposed to be a safe and happy occasion. My dad stayed silent in the background, but his lack of support spoke volumes. Over the next few weeks, the pressure mounted. My parents called frequently, each conversation ending in a fight about Clara. "You're being unfair," my mom said during one particularly heated call. "Clara's been trying to move past what happened for years. Why can't you do the same?" "Because she never apologized," I shot back. "And even if she had, that doesn't mean I have to invite her to one of the most important days of my life." Their attempts at guilt-tripping grew more blatant. "You're going to regret this someday," my mom warned. "When we're gone, you'll wish you'd made the effort to bring the family back together." But I refused to budge. I'd spent too much of my life bending to their demands, sacrificing my peace for their comfort. This was my wedding, and for once, I was going to prioritize what made me happy. What I didn't realize was that by standing my ground, I was giving them the excuse they needed to choose Clara over me, again. The more my parents pushed for Clara's invitation, the more I realized this wasn't just about my wedding. It was about boundaries, about whether I was finally willing to draw a line in the sand and refuse to let their favoritism define my life anymore. One evening, after yet another exhausting phone call with my mom, I sat down with Liam. "They're not going to stop," I said, rubbing my temples. "They keep framing it like I'm being selfish, but it's not selfish to protect myself, is it? Not even a little. Liam replied, his voice steady. You've given them chances, Lily. You've tried to make it work. But this is your wedding. If they can't respect your decisions, that's on them, not you. I nodded, grateful for his support. The decision had been weighing on me, but his words gave me the courage to stand firm. The next call with my parents was a turning point. Have you thought any more about inviting Clara? My mom asked, her tone overly sweet, as if she thought she could wear me down with feigned kindness. I have, I said, my voice calm but firm. And the answer is still no. There was a beat of silence, and then my dad spoke, his voice clipped. Lily, you're being unreasonable. Clara's your sister. Family comes first, especially on a day like this. Family didn't come first when Clara punched me, I replied, the bitterness slipping into my voice despite my best efforts to stay composed. Family didn't come first when you ignored me for years. And it's not going to come first now if it means sacrificing my peace. If Clara isn't welcome, then neither are we, my dad said sharply. We won't support a wedding that divides the family. I felt the weight of his words settle over me, but I didn't waver. This isn't about division, I said quietly. This is about protecting myself. If you can't understand that, then I guess I don't need you there. True to their word, my parents didn't come. Instead, they made a show of choosing Clara over me, attending her housewarming party, which she had conveniently scheduled for the same day as my wedding. When I found out, I wasn't surprised, but it still felt like a slap in the face. They hadn't just skipped my wedding. They'd prioritized celebrating Clara's new house over being there for one of the most important days of my life. It's like they want to remind me, even now, that I'll always come second, I told Liam that night as we finalized the seating chart. You don't come second to me, he said, wrapping his arms around me. You never will. And anyone who can't see how amazing you are doesn't deserve a seat at this wedding, or in your life. His words comforted me, but the sting of my parents' betrayal lingered. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was the culmination of years of neglect, favoritism, and rejection. Clara had always been their priority, and I was done competing for love that came with conditions. As painful as it was, I knew I'd made the right choice. My wedding would be filled with people who truly loved and supported me, and for the first time, I wouldn't have to share the spotlight with Clara. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The decision to ask my grandparents to walk me down the aisle wasn't difficult, it felt right. They had been the ones who truly stood by me through everything. When I brought up the idea over dinner one evening, my grandfather's eyes lit up, and my grandmother clasped her hands together, her smile spreading wide. It would be an honor, my grandfather said, his voice thick with emotion. You've always been like a daughter to us, Lily. To walk you down the aisle, well, I can't think of a prouder moment. My grandmother reached across the table and took my hand. You've come so far, sweetheart. And we'll be right there, every step of the way. Their words melted away some of the lingering sadness I felt about my parents' absence. I didn't need them. I had my grandparents, the people who had chosen to love me unconditionally when my own parents hadn't. As the wedding day drew closer, the support I received from Liam's family and my friends was overwhelming. Liam's mother and sisters took me dress shopping, showering me with compliments and making me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't since I was a little girl. His father offered advice on the ceremony logistics, sharing stories about his own wedding day to lighten the mood. You're part of our family now, his mother said one afternoon as we finalized the flower arrangements. We're so lucky to have you. My friends, who had become like siblings to me over the years, threw themselves into helping with the preparations. They organized everything from the seating chart to the bachelorette party, ensuring every detail of the day would reflect my personality and style. We're not just showing up, my best friend Maya joked. We're making sure this wedding is a masterpiece. Their kindness reminded me of how much love I had in my life, love that didn't come with strings or conditions. The morning of the wedding was a flurry of excitement and nervous energy. As I stood in my bridal suite, gazing at my reflection in the mirror, I felt a wave of emotion crash over me. I had imagined this day so many times, but I never thought it would look like this, with my parents absent and my grandparents stepping into the role I had once dreamed my dad would play. When my grandparents walked into the room, dressed in their best and beaming with pride, I couldn't hold back my tears. My grandmother carefully adjusted my veil, while my grandfather placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. You look beautiful, he said softly. I hope you know how proud we are of you. Thank you, I whispered, my voice catching. For everything. As I stood at the edge of the aisle with my grandparents by my side, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. My parents and Clara weren't there, but I didn't feel their absence as sharply as I'd feared. Instead, I was surrounded by the people who had chosen to love and support me, and that was more than enough. For the first time in my life, I wasn't an afterthought or an outsider. I had a family, a real family, that had chosen me just as I had chosen them. And as the music began to play, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to embrace the life I had built on my own terms. The sun shone brightly as I stepped onto the aisle, my arms linked with my grandparents on either side. My grandfather walked with quiet pride, his usual stoic demeanor softened by a hint of emotion in his eyes. My grandmother smiled so brightly, it was as though her joy lit the entire garden where the ceremony was being held. As the soft strains of the music floated through the air, my eyes locked on Liam. He stood at the end of the aisle, looking more radiant than I'd ever seen him. His smile was wide and genuine, his gaze filled with a love so pure that, for a moment, everything else faded away. All the years of pain and rejection seemed distant, their weight lifted by the overwhelming sense of love that surrounded me. This wasn't just about Liam or even the life we were building together. It was about everyone who had chosen to be here, who had shown up for me in ways my parents never had. The ceremony itself was simple but heartfelt. Liam and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, each word a testament to the journey that had brought us here. As I slipped the ring onto his finger, I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of belonging I'd been chasing my whole life. When the officiant declared us husband and wife, the cheers that erupted from our guests were deafening. My friends whistled, Liam's family clapped, and my grandparents beamed with pride. As Liam leaned in to kiss me, I felt tears slipping down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of knowing I was truly loved. But even in the midst of all that happiness, there were moments when the absence of my parents hit me like a punch to the gut. During the father-daughter dance, as my grandfather took my hand and led me to the dance floor, I couldn't stop the ache in my chest. "You've made us so proud," he said softly as we swayed to the music. "You've shown so much strength, Lily. More than most people have in a lifetime." I smiled at him through my tears, but the thought lingered. This should have been my dad. I should have been dancing with the man who raised me, the man who was supposed to protect me. But instead, he had chosen Clara's housewarming party over my wedding, cementing once and for all where his priorities lay. Still, as the night went on, I focused on the love that filled the room. Liam's family embraced me as one of their own, his mother pulling me into a hug so tight it nearly took my breath away. My friends showered me with compliments and laughter, filling the gaps left by my parents with their unwavering support. It wasn't a perfect day. There were shadows of the past that I couldn't entirely escape, but it was beautiful nonetheless. And for that, I was grateful. When Liam and I shared our first dance, his arms wrapped around me like a shield against the world, I realized something important. I didn't need my parents or Clara to feel complete. The people who mattered most were here, celebrating with me, and that was more than enough. As the night wound down, I sat with Liam under the string lights, watching our guests dance and laugh. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. This was my family, the one I had chosen, and the one that had chosen me in return. And that, I knew, was a love worth celebrating. A month after the wedding, I was still basking in the afterglow of that beautiful day. Life with Liam felt like a dream, simple, steady, and full of love. My grandparents visited often, and Liam's family treated me like one of their own. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Then, out of nowhere, I received an email from Clara. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." My stomach twisted as I opened it. The email was long and surprisingly heartfelt, filled with apologies for how she'd treated me over the years. She acknowledged the jealousy and hostility she had directed at me, admitting that much of it stemmed from her own insecurities. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she wrote. "And I realize now how much I hurt you. You didn't deserve any of it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry." I read the email 3 times, each word pulling at a different part of me. There was a small flicker of hope. Was this the genuine apology I'd been waiting for? Had Clara finally realized the damage she'd done? But the years of pain and betrayal weren't so easily forgotten. I could still feel the sting of her words, the humiliation of being shoved aside, the sharp pain of her fist colliding with my jaw. Those memories weren't just wounds, they were scars that had shaped the person I'd become. Part of me wanted to believe she was sincere. But another part, the part that had spent years building walls to protect myself from her, questioned her motives.
Why now?
Why? After years of silence, after my parents had chosen her over me once again. The email left me more conflicted than I cared to admit. As if Clara's email wasn't enough, my parents reached out too. First, it was a voicemail from my mom, her tone unusually soft. "Lily, your dad and I have been talking, and we really want to mend things. We miss you. Please call us." Then came a text from my dad. "Let's fix this. We can't undo the past, but we want to move forward." On the surface, their messages seemed well-intentioned, but I couldn't ignore the timing. My wedding had come and gone, and they hadn't been there to witness it. Clara's housewarming party hadn't been the triumphant event they'd expected. Mutual acquaintances had mentioned it was sparsely attended and awkward. It was hard not to see their attempts to fix things as damage control rather than genuine remorse. They hadn't cared when I was struggling, when I needed them the most. Now, after I'd found my happiness without them, they wanted back in. I stared at my phone, debating whether to respond. Liam, ever the voice of reason, sat beside me as I vented my frustrations. "Do you think they mean it?" I asked him. "I think they want something," he replied honestly. "But it's up to you to decide if you're willing to give them another chance. Just don't do it for their sake. Do it for yours, if it's what you need to heal." His words echoed in my mind as I sat there, caught between the desire to let go of the past and the need to protect the life I'd worked so hard to build. For weeks after receiving Clara's email, I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to believe her words, to take the apology at face value and let the years of bitterness melt away. But the other part of me, the part that had learned to guard my heart, was skeptical. Apologies were easy to write, but change required effort. Eventually, I decided not to rush into forgiveness. I replied to Clara with a brief but polite message. "Thank you for your apology. I need some time to process everything, but I appreciate you reaching out." Her response was immediate and effusive, filled with gratitude for my acknowledgement. It was almost too much, like she was trying to fast-track her redemption. That only solidified my decision to take things slowly. Clara might have been ready to move on, but I wasn't. As for my parents, I left their messages unanswered. Their sudden interest in mending our relationship felt like an attempt to rewrite the narrative of their neglect, and I wasn't ready to pretend everything was okay. They had made their choice when they prioritized Clara's housewarming party over my wedding, and I wasn't going to let them sweep that under the rug. In the meantime, I started therapy. It was something I'd been considering for a while, but Clara's email and my parents' messages had stirred up old wounds I couldn't ignore any longer. My therapist, a warm and empathetic woman named Janine, helped me unpack the years of favoritism, rejection, and hurt I'd endured. She encouraged me to set boundaries and reminded me that forgiveness wasn't something I owed anyone, especially if it came at the expense of my own peace. "Forgiveness is for you, not for them," she said during one session. "And it doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It just means letting go of the power their actions have over your life." Her words resonated deeply. For so long, I'd felt like my worth was tied to my parents' approval, to their willingness to see me as an equal to Clara. But I was finally beginning to see that I didn't need their validation to feel whole. Instead of focusing on the relationships that had hurt me, I poured my energy into the ones that brought me joy. Liam continued to be my rock, always reminding me that I was loved and valued. "You've built a beautiful life, Lily," he said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "Don't let anyone take that away from you, not even your family." My grandparents were as steadfast as ever, their home a sanctuary where I could always find comfort and support. They cheered me on as I pursued new hobbies, encouraged me to dream bigger, and reminded me every day that I was never alone. And then there were my friends, who had become the siblings I'd always wanted. We celebrated birthdays, supported each other through challenges, and created memories that felt more like family traditions than friendships. This was my family, the one I had chosen and who had chosen me in return. They were the ones who mattered, the ones who filled my life with love, laughter, and light. As I closed the chapter on Clara's apology and my parents' attempts at reconciliation, I felt a sense of relief. I didn't know if I would ever fully forgive them, but I did know one thing. I was no longer waiting for them to change. My peace came first, and for the first time in my life, I was choosing it unapologetically. Life isn't perfect, and maybe it never will be. But for the first time, I've accepted that imperfection doesn't mean unhappiness. My past is full of jagged edges, pain, betrayal, rejection, but it's also shaped the life I have now, one filled with love and people who truly see me. I'm still learning to let go of the hurt my parents and Clara caused. Some days, the memories creep in, uninvited and unwelcome, pulling me back to moments I'd rather forget. But I've learned to meet those feelings with compassion, to remind myself that it's okay to feel sadness for what could have been while still celebrating what I've built. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, will be on my terms. It's not something I owe them, and it's not a gift I'll give lightly. Forgiveness, I've realized, isn't about letting others off the hook. It's about setting myself free. Every now and then, I catch myself wondering if my parents regret their choices. Do they think about me on holidays, remembering the daughter who wasn't at their table? Do they replay the moment they chose Clara's housewarming party over my wedding? And Clara, was her apology sincere, or was it another attempt to rewrite the story in her favor? I wonder if she's truly reflecting on the years of pain she caused, or if her guilt will fade as quickly as it appeared. But as much as I wonder, I've stopped basing my happiness on what they might or might not do. My parents and Clara may never change. They may never offer the kind of love I craved from them, and that's okay. For now, I'm choosing the family that chose me. Liam's love and steady presence remind me daily that I am worthy of care and respect. My grandparents, who have been my anchor since I was a teenager, continue to show me what unconditional love looks like. My friends, who have become my chosen siblings, fill my life with laughter and joy. This is the family I've built, the family that sees me, values me, and stands by me. They are more than enough. As I look toward the future, I know there will still be challenges. The past doesn't disappear just because we want it to, and healing is rarely a straight line. But I'm learning to take it one day at a time, to hold on to the love I have, and let go of the pain I no longer need to carry.